Status of life support cycle? Commander Darius Holt's voice cut across the command deck, crisp and measured. He didn't raise it, he never needed to, but men shifted straighter in their chairs when he spoke. Stable, Commander. Recycling efficiency at 92%, reported Lieutenant Harker from the environmental station. His fingertips moved across the laser plasma display, the green arcs steady against his hardened features. Holt nodded once and turned toward the forward canopy. Out there, Earth rotated slowly, blue seas streaked with silver-gray storm bands. It looked tranquil from orbit, but Holt knew better than any man alive what lay hidden beneath those clouds. Bombed ports, empty cities, families living beneath collapsed rail lines. The Dominion hadn't just fought a war, they had carved lessons into stone with orbital strikes and ground occupations. Humanity had given everything it had, and everything it had wasn't enough. The deck creaked faintly as the old ship adjusted its orientation. Vanguard had been hauled out of storage not 6 months ago. Lunar dust still clung to her plating when Holt first walked her corridors. She had been entombed in silence for decades, a relic of an earlier age of desperation. Mothballed in a covert dock because her main weapon, the neutrino disruptor array, was never supposed to see daylight. Too unstable, too unpredictable, too dangerous to field across a fleet. But Earth no longer had fleets. It had this ship. Captain, Chief Engineer Garrett's boots echoed as he crossed the deck. His uniform bore the worn creases of a man who spent more time beneath hull panels than on parade. We've run another diagnostic on the disruptor core. It'll fire if you order it, but every time we spool it, the containment edges crawl closer to redline. Push too far and we'll burn ourselves before we touch them. Holt didn't answer immediately. He let the words settle across the crew. Every man present knew what they had signed up for. This wasn't a warship designed to bring anyone home. He folded his hands behind his back, the leather of his gloves brushing against each other. Then it will serve its purpose, Holt said. Our job isn't survival. Our job is to remind the galaxy that Earth does not kneel quietly. Silence followed, not because the men disagreed, but because none of them needed convincing. They had chosen this posting. They had written their farewells on paper, left them in sealed lockers, and boarded knowing there would be no return. 200 men on a single ship against 900 Dominion fleets was suicide. Yet here they were. Sergeant Callan, a broad-shouldered veteran from the Titan shipyard's defense, leaned forward against the rail that circled the command pit. His left eye bore the faint scar of a plasma burn. "Sir," he said, "the men know what's coming. They just want to hear it from you straight. We've all buried too many illusions already." Holt stepped closer, boots measured against the deck plating, and placed both hands on the railing. His gaze swept across the gathered faces. Navigation officers, gunnery crews, technicians at their displays. Some were barely 20, others gray-haired, called out of retirement because no one else remained with the skill to operate a warship of this class. "We are the last ship because the rest already bought us this chance," Holt said evenly. Neptune held longer than anyone predicted. Mars bled for every hour it could. Titan's workers died wrench in hand, turning scaffolds into barricades. They weren't wasted. They bought us time to bring Vanguard back from her grave. We don't waste what others purchased with their lives. If this ship falls, it will fall striking so deep, they'll remember Earth as more than a target. They'll remember Earth as the enemy they never broke. No applause, no rallying cry, just the sound of boots shifting and men turning back to their stations with renewed focus. That was the kind of crew Holt wanted. Men who didn't need speeches, just truth. He moved to his chair, lowering himself with deliberate calm. The heads-up display flickered alive across his visor as the ship's sensors updated. Dominion fleets still hadn't reached visible range, but he knew they were coming. Intelligence had tracked the armada as it departed the Helios belt, a tidal surge of firepower meant to erase the last shreds of Earth's defiance. They weren't simply conquering, they were teaching the system what it meant to resist. Ensign Rourke, thin and sharp-eyed, spoke from comms. Intercepts from outer system confirm approach vectors. Estimated time to contact, 32 hours. "Keep watching," Holt said. If they so much as shift formation, I want it logged. Rourke nodded, and his eyes never left the scrolling code dancing across his panel. Holt let his gaze rest again on Earth. He could almost hear his father's gravelly warning from years ago. Wars don't end when one side surrenders. They end when memory itself is crushed. The Dominion understood that. They wanted to crush not just armies, but the idea that humanity could ever rise again. That was why Vanguard mattered, not as a weapon of victory, but as a weapon of memory. The smell of oil and disinfectant still clung faintly to the air from months of refit. The floor beneath him felt different than modern ships. Older alloys, less vibration dampening, more honest weight. Every corridor he had walked since taking command had whispered the same truth. This was a ship built not for comfort, but for final stands. "Commander," Garrett spoke again, quieter this time. "You should know. Half the reactor team already rotated their wills. They didn't want to wait." Holt gave a single nod. He did, and ask names. He didn't need to. He adjusted his gloves again and leaned back, speaking loud enough for the bridge to hear. "Every man aboard already knows what his sacrifice means. What matters now is that the Dominion learns what it costs to push Earth against the wall." No one moved. The only sound was the rhythm of keys striking displays, the low intake of breath as men checked readings again, and the occasional crackle of comms. Outside, Earth spun quietly, waiting. For Darius Holt, the waiting was always the hardest. But the moment the Dominion crossed into range, waiting would end, and the last warship of Earth would remind the stars why humanity could never be erased. "Contact confirmed. Outer system patrols just went dark." Ensign Rourke's words sliced through the bridge like a knife. His eyes darted over the laser plasma displays, streams of coded symbols stretching faster than his lips could keep up. Commander Darius Holt stood slowly from his chair, fingers tightening on the rail in front of him. He didn't ask for clarification. He had been waiting for this line to be spoken for months. "Show me." The main forward panels blinked and shifted. A lattice of crimson arcs began to unfold across the solar frontier, each mark representing a Dominion fleet signature. One cluster became 10, 10 became hundreds, until the screen seared with movement. It was not an army of invasion, it was a tidal wall, 900 fleets converging on a single world. The bridge felt colder. Officers exchanged glances, their shoulders tightening as if the sheer weight of that number pressed down on their lungs. "They're not here to conquer," Holt said at last, voice even. "This is punishment." The words grounded every man on the deck. Punishment meant annihilation. It meant obliteration of memory, erasure of pride. The Dominion wasn't risking so much firepower because Earth was dangerous. It was because Earth had humiliated them. Neptune's sabotage campaign, Mars' defense towers that shot down a Dominion supercarrier, Titan's workers who rigged their incomplete frames to collapse and drag entire squadrons into Saturn's pull. The Dominion had lost more ships than their doctrine predicted. Their response was not negotiation, but spectacle. Sergeant Callan's scarred face twitched. "They want the colonies to see us broken," he said, his voice carrying the rough edge of someone who had lived through Titan's fire. "They'll drag our bones through the system and call it justice." Lieutenant Harker tapped a key, expanding the map. His knuckles whitened. "They're already forming tiers. Long-range artillery ships behind. Carrier rows building a shield of drones. Interceptors in the lead. Every doctrine textbook says this is overkill, but they don't care." Garrett exhaled sharply, leaning against the railing with grease still under his fingernails. 900 fleets to erase one ship and a planet too battered to feed itself. His tone carried disgust more than fear. They don't want a fight. They want every survivor to live knowing resistance brings storms like this. Holt studied the screen in silence. He could almost smell the iron tang from the recycled air, feel the dryness on his tongue that came from weeks without fresh water supplies. His crew stood at their posts, eyes locked on him as if waiting for proof that their choice to be here was not suicide but purpose. He gave it to them. "Then we give them a memory they'll regret," Holt said. A low murmur spread, not cheer, not bravado, simply the kind of acknowledgement soldiers make when reminded why they're still alive. He turned back to the forward panels. As the Dominion fleets grew clearer in the system's relay feeds, Holt's mind tugged backward, dragging him through memories he wished had faded. The Pacific Defense Line at Neptune. He had been a junior officer then, watching his captain order missile pods to fire until the racks boiled empty. They had held 3 days longer than projections, long enough to evacuate millions. Holt still remembered the vibration through the deck as the last human cruiser rammed a Dominion dreadnought, buying them another hour. The orbital guard at Mars. Holt had arrived too late, watching the red planet glow under kinetic strikes that carved the equator. Men he had trained with vanished in that moment, their names wiped out with the dust storms. The Titan shipyards. He had known engineers there, men who built frames with their bare hands. They welded their half-complete hulls into barricades, detonated plasma lines, dragged alien warships into Saturn's grip. None returned, but Dominion reports recorded losses so severe that their admirals were recalled in disgrace. Each defeat had bought weeks, sometimes months. Each loss had taught Dominion commanders that humans did not fight like textbooks predicted. And that was why 900 fleets now bore down, not because Earth was strong, but because Earth had dared to humiliate them. "Range?" Holt asked. Rourke's throat bobbed before he answered. 31 hours, until outer orbit. The crew absorbed that silently. Hours, not days, not weeks. In little more than one rotation of Earth's day, everything they had prepared for would ignite. Holt's jaw clenched. He felt the dryness in his mouth, the subtle vibration of boots against the deck as men shifted their weight, the sharpness of sterilized air biting his nostrils. All reminders that this ship was alive, and so were the 200 souls he carried. "Relay a system-wide broadcast to the remaining colonies," Holt ordered. "No speeches, just a single line. Vanguard holds the line. Nothing more." Rourke blinked, then nodded. His fingers flew across the panel, encoding the message. Simple, short, undeniable. Every bunker, every hidden outpost, every civilian listening to whispered transmissions would hear it. Chief Garrett's brow furrowed. "Commander, if they know Vanguard is active—" "They already know," Holt interrupted. His tone carried no room for debate. "And if they think this ship is cowering, the terror works. If they know this ship is waiting, the terror cracks." Garrett pressed his lips tight and said nothing further. The Dominion's crimson arcs continued spreading across the display, swallowing sectors like wildfire. Their superiority was absolute. Their technology outclassed anything humanity had built. Their numbers dwarfed imagination. Yet Holt knew, as every man on this ship knew, that superiority did not erase fear. Even Titans bled when stabbed in the right place. He walked to the center of the deck, resting both hands on the rail again. "We don't match them in firepower. We don't match them in ships. What we match them in is the ability to choose how we die. And that choice, gentlemen, can change how the system remembers us." For a moment, no one breathed. Then the bridge came alive with renewed focus. Orders passed, displays updated, preparations began. Not a single man expected survival, but every one of them now expected meaning. Holt let the moment linger before lowering himself into his chair. He stared at the screen again, the crimson arc still growing, and whispered so only he could hear. "Let them come." "Commander, permission to speak freely?" The words came from Sergeant Callan, who had stepped forward with the kind of posture that signaled both respect and defiance. His scarred face caught the glow of the laser plasma displays, his single working eye unblinking. "Granted," Holt said, not moving from the command chair. "Why us?" Callan's tone wasn't bitter, but it carried the rough weight of a man who had buried too many friends. 200 men on one ship. We know what's waiting out there. Neptune had 20 cruisers. Mars had entire squadrons. Titan had battalions of workers turned soldiers. They're gone. Why are we the ones left holding this line? The bridge crew stilled, heads turned subtly from their stations, eyes darting toward Holt. The question wasn't rebellion. It was what they had all thought but hadn't dared put into words. Holt leaned forward, hands folded, elbows resting on his knees. His voice came steady, almost conversational. Because this ship carries a weapon none of the others could use, because this crew volunteered when others didn't, and because someone has to be here. If not us, then no one. Callan's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he nodded and stepped back, standing straighter as if Holt's words had anchored him. Holt rose slowly, his boots striking the deck with deliberate cadence. He walked to the central rail, letting his eyes sweep the bridge. I've served on ships that went down with their flags still flying. I watched Neptune's defenders burn in their own reactor flare to deny capture. I saw Mars' skies torn apart while its guard squadrons fought until they couldn't maneuver. I know the Titan yards fell because the workers wired their scaffolds to drag half a fleet into Saturn's gravity. I don't carry illusions about this fight. I carry the lessons they paid for. He paused, letting the silence breathe. Men on the deck lowered their eyes, some swallowing hard, others gripping the rails as if the memories Holt spoke of were their own. We don't fight like they did, Holt continued. They fought to delay, to bleed the Dominion, to slow their advance. That was the right choice for them. But Vanguard is not a delaying tool. This ship is designed to fracture, to make the Dominion fear that humans are not finished. And fear will buy us more than time. It will buy us doubt in the enemy's mind. Lieutenant Harker adjusted his headset, his tone professional, but with a T in thread of unease. Sir, if we're meant to fracture them, we'll need cohesion ourselves. One break in the chain of command and we'll unravel before they do. Holt nodded. Correct. Which is why discipline here is absolute. Orders run down this deck like blood through veins. A hesitation, a question, a crack in execution, those will cost us more than the Dominion's fire ever could. We cannot afford division. The words were not threat but truth. He delivered them calmly, and in that calm, men felt the steel of his intent. Chief Garrett stepped forward, wiping a streak of grease from his hands with a rag already stained beyond saving. Men will follow, Commander, but they'll need more than discipline. They need to believe there's a reason to stand at their stations when the sky outside turns red. Holt turned his eyes to him. Then give them reason. Every technician, every engineer, every gunner, remind them that we are not here for survival. We are here so that the Dominion remembers Earth not as ashes, but as teeth. We will not be a forgotten ruin. Garrett gave a sharp nod, the kind that ended debates, and moved back toward engineering control. Ensign Rourke's voice cut in from comms, softer than usual. Commander, I served at Neptune. My brother was on Mars. Both times we were told help was coming. It never arrived. Are we telling the colonies the truth now, or another lie? Holt looked at the young officer, his face pale in the glow of the displays. We tell them only one truth. Vanguard holds the line. That's not a promise of victory. It's a promise that while this ship stands, humanity is not finished. They deserve to hear that, even if our bones end up adrift tomorrow. The words landed heavier than any sermon could. Some men blinked rapidly, fighting off images of families left behind. Others clenched fists quietly at their sides. Holt straightened, returning to his chair. His posture carried the unshakable weight of command. This crew volunteered. Each of you signed knowing the odds. That makes you something rarer than 10 soldiers. You are witnesses. Witnesses to the end of this chapter and the beginning of whatever comes next. You'll fight not for yourselves, but for the memory that Earth did not bow without a scar left on its enemy. The deck remained silent, but not empty. The silence now carried intent, the kind that solidifies when words become conviction. Holt tapped the armrest of his chair, signaling closure. Chain of command will hold. Orders flow through the ranks, unquestioned, executed without delay. When fire comes, we move as one. If you doubt, if you hesitate, men will die. If you follow, then even in death you will carve meaning into this war." He leaned back, closing his eyes briefly, and for a flicker of a moment the weight pressed on him alone. He remembered the faces of captains who didn't return, the hollow look of evacuation transports too light because not enough souls made it aboard. Those ghosts were his burden. He carried them so his men could carry something else. Purpose. Opening his eyes again, he whispered only to himself, "They'll remember us." And on the bridge, every officer returned to his task with a steadier hand than before, as if those 3 words had carried them all. Contact inbound. Multiple energy signatures crossing defensive orbit. Ensign Rourke's shout broke the silence of the bridge. His fingers danced across the laser plasma display, streams of scarlet markers pouring in faster than he could call them. Commander Darius Holt rose, his jaw set. The Dominion had finally opened the curtain. He stepped toward the forward canopy, watching as the first streaks of light tore across the system's dark veil. Energy lances burned in perfect arcs, whole salvos thrown in sweeping patterns that illuminated the night like storms. Behind them, drones poured forward in black clusters, swarming with predatory intent. The deck shuddered as distant detonations rippled through the orbit. Earth's upper atmosphere began to shimmer with violent flashes. From orbit, it looked like a storm had been ignited in the sky. Holt gripped the railing, feeling the vibration pulse through his arms. Lieutenant Harker's voice cracked with urgency. "Outer monitoring posts are gone. They flattened them before we could get full telemetry." He dragged new maps onto the display. "They're painting the entire orbit with saturation fire. Nothing targeted, just complete suppression." "Standard doctrine," Holt muttered. His eyes tracked the oncoming formation with unnerving calm. "Erase everything before the fleet even settles." Garrett slammed a fist against the bulkhead. "They're not even aiming at us yet. They're burning ground sites, orbital junk, anything that breathes. They're trying to smother the planet before they land a single soldier." The noise from the outside grew, a deep, thudding resonance that rolled through the structure of the ship with each distant impact. The recycled air tasted sharp, faint traces of scorched insulation drifting from overworked panels. Holt inhaled slowly, anchoring himself in that reality, refusing to let the enormity of the firestorm blur his focus. Sergeant Callan stepped forward, teeth clenched, the scar across his cheek tightening. "Commander, we should return fire. Give the men something. Sitting silent will tear them apart." All eyes shifted to Holt. His hands stayed steady on the rail. He let the seconds stretch, each officer waiting, the tension crawling into their chests like wire pulled tight. "Not yet," Holt said, voice even. Rourke blinked. "Sir, if we don't—" "Not yet." Holt turned, letting his eyes lock with the younger man. "They want us panicked. They want us to waste our strength against their opening spectacle. We are not here to scream into the storm. We are here to choose when to strike." The room quieted again. Men turned back to their displays, but the unease lingered. They could see the chaos outside, could feel the floor tremble under bombardment, and yet their captain ordered silence. Harker leaned closer to Holt. "Sir, permission to speak plainly?" "Always," Holt said. "They'll think you're frozen. The crew. They'll wonder if the waiting means fear." Holt's gaze returned to the window, where another wave of light split the sky, carving the atmosphere into blinding arcs. "Then they'll learn what it means to follow a commander who chooses the ground of battle, not one who is dragged into it." The words settled differently than speeches. They were heavy, factual, and the men understood. The ship jolted suddenly, a tremor rattling the deck plates. Lights flickered as a drone wave struck against orbital debris too close to their sector. Warning klaxons blared briefly, then cut out as systems compensated. Holt could hear the sharp hiss of someone's breath on the bridge, followed by the scrape of a chair as a young technician adjusted his posture, forcing composure. "Damage?" Holt asked. Garrett shook his head. "Nothing direct, just debris caught in the blast radius. Hull integrity solid. Holt nodded, his jaw hardening. Then we hold. For long minutes, the bridge became a theater of silence against the storm. Outside, the Dominion lit the heavens in fire, their arrogance spilling across Earth's sky without pause. Inside, men swallowed nerves, fingers twitching on consoles, eyes darting to their commander for signals he deliberately withheld. Finally, Holt spoke again, his tone low, almost conversational. Do you know why Neptune held as long as it did? The question startled the bridge crew. None answered immediately. Because the captain refused to open fire when the first barrage came, Holt continued. The Dominion expected an immediate exchange. Instead, the guard waited. They watched. They learned the rhythm of the attack, then struck where the enemy had left themselves open. It bought 3 days. Without those 3 days, half the colonies would never have escaped. Callan's hands loosened on the rail. Rourke's throat eased, though his face stayed tense. Even Harker, still pale, exhaled and let his shoulders settle. Holt turned back to them. We will fight. That's not in question. But we will not waste fire screaming at shadows. They believe we are prey in their net. Let them. Every moment they think that is a moment we are still alive to strike. The words broke the grip of doubt. Men shifted back to work, no longer with twitching panic, but with the cold realization that their commander was not paralyzed. He was waiting for something they could not yet see, but trusted he would. Outside, the bombardment intensified. Whole swarms of drones hurled themselves into lower orbit, detonating in controlled waves that painted the upper atmosphere in burning ribbons. From the surface, the sky must have looked like a storm of falling suns. Holt thought of the families in bunkers, children covering ears against concussions rolling through the ground. He closed his fist around the rail until his knuckles ached. Keep monitoring their formations, he ordered. Record every gap, every overlap, every stutter in their patterns. The Dominion believes they're untouchable. That arrogance is our entry point. The bridge acknowledged, each man diving into his task with renewed purpose. Minutes bled into hours as the storm outside raged, but Holt never moved from his stance near the forward canopy. He didn't blink at the light show, didn't flinch when tremors rippled the deck. The Dominion was testing fear itself as a weapon. Holt's refusal to answer was his defiance. And in that silence, his crew began to understand. The waiting was not paralysis. It was the sharpening of a blade. Commander, they're tightening the formation, Lieutenant Harker called, his eyes fixed on the laser plasma display as arcs of red shifted closer together. Drone swarms pushing forward, artillery moving in behind. They're preparing to close the net. Holt's hand lifted from the railing, palm steady in the artificial light. Then it's time, he said. His voice was quiet, but every man on the bridge heard it. The order spread like a current. Sergeant Callan stepped to the auxiliary station, his scar catching the glow as he keyed in a coded sequence buried deep in Vanguard's encrypted systems. Across the deck, displays flickered, pulling up a separate grid, a different map, hidden from all but those who had been briefed. Dozens of green symbols lit across the wreckage fields scattered throughout orbit. To the Dominion, it looked like the skeletal remains of shattered stations and ships. To Holt, it was the weapon his predecessors had left behind. Minefields armed, Callan said, his voice roughened but controlled. The bridge filled with the faint rhythm of consoles acknowledging readiness. A ripple of unease touched the younger crew as the full scope came into view. Hundreds of satellites, disguised as debris, dormant for months, waiting for this exact moment. Chief Garrett's lips twisted in grim satisfaction. They thought the dead fields were garbage. They never imagined we buried teeth in it. Holt kept his gaze forward, his tone unyielding. Trigger sequence, now. Callan struck the key. From Earth's orbit, silent carcasses awoke. Sections of broken panels split open, revealing concealed warheads. Containers disguised as twisted girders blinked to life, their tracking systems locking awe. And the incoming drones. Shattered scaffolds spun slowly, revealing launch ports hidden under rust and ash. A storm erupted. Hundreds of micro-missiles streaked from the debris, leaving lines of pale fire that cut through the Dominion's lead swarms. Drones ignited in bursts of light, chains of explosions spreading across their clustered formations. The first capital ship caught in the field faltered as a mine latched onto its hull, detonating with a thunderous bloom that ripped a hole through its armor. The shockwave tumbled wreckage into its sister vessel, both colliding in a chaos the Dominion had never expected. The bridge crew stared as symbols flickered out on the displays. For a heartbeat, disbelief froze them. Then the silence cracked into gasps. "They didn't see it coming," Rourke whispered, his young face bathed in green light. "Sir, they're pulling drones back. They're breaking rank." Holt cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Maintain discipline. Do not celebrate. This is their first lesson, not their last." The weight of his words pressed the men back into their focus. Still, the reality of what they had witnessed pulsed inside their chests. For the first time, the Dominion bled before even touching Vanguard. Garrett leaned against the console, his grease-streaked hands shaking slightly. "Months of work," he muttered. "Every engineer who planted those mines knew they'd never see them used. They'd be smiling now." Holt allowed himself a breath, not of relief, but of recognition. "They bought us this strike. We will honor it by not squandering what follows." The deck jolted again as another Dominion vessel detonated, wreckage spiraling away. On the display, red arcs scattered briefly before reforming. The enemy wasn't retreating, they were adjusting, calculating what had struck them. Harker's brow furrowed. "Sir, their forward squadrons are splitting, trying to sweep the fields clear. They won't fall for the same trick twice." "Good," Holt said. His eyes narrowed, the steel in his tone, he cutting clean. "We never planned for them to. What matters is that they now know every field could hide a knife. From here on, they will see ghosts in every shadow." The words rolled through the bridge with quiet resonance. Men breathed deeper, chins raised, not in triumph, but in grim resolve. Outside, the light of detonations reflected against Earth's curve, scattering across the clouds like firestorms in the sky. Somewhere below, civilians in bunkers would be staring upward, thinking the heavens themselves had turned against them. They wouldn't know that those flashes meant survival, at least for a while longer. Callan returned from the auxiliary station, his boots heavy against the deck. "Commander, multiple hits confirmed. Enemy losses moderate, but their formation has slowed. They're wary now." Rourke, still staring at the readouts, murmured, "They didn't expect us to fight like this. They thought we'd just stand and burn." Holt's gaze settled on him. "The Dominion always assumes we'll fight on their terms. That's why they're here with 900 fleets, to crush our will. But war isn't about numbers. It's about where you choose to cut. We will keep cutting until they bleed fear." The crew absorbed his words, steadying themselves. The sense of shock transformed into focus. Another wave of drones advanced, cautious now, their spread wider, their speed measured. Holt studied the display, eyes following their hesitant arcs. "They've lost momentum," he said. "That's the opening we needed." The bridge vibrated with another series of detonations, more wreckage scattering into the black. The enemy adjusted again, slower this time, more deliberate, as if every fragment of debris now carried hidden death. Holt let a long breath slip from his chest, then turned to his men. "Remember this moment. They came expecting silence. They came expecting prey. Instead, they found a graveyard that fights back. Let that memory eat at them." The bridge crew remained silent, not out of fear, but out of respect. They returned to their stations, hands steady now, movements deliberate. The Dominion armada still loomed, its overwhelming strength unchanged, but the illusion of inevitability had cracked, and in war, Holt knew, cracks had a way of spreading. "Commander, I've found something." The words came from Lieutenant Harker, sharper than usual, carrying the urgency of a man who knew he was gambling his reputation. He stood halfway bent over his console, fingers moving in erratic bursts across the laser plasma display. Darius Holt stepped closer, his boots echoing against the deck plates. "Report." Harker didn't immediately turn. His eyes remained locked on the streams of data. Their fleet coordination, it isn't organic. Every movement, every staggered wave, it runs through a common relay. Not one command node per formation, but a single lattice binding them all. "Sir, they've built themselves a cage." On the main canopy screen, the Dominion armada shifted like a machine made of 900 separate pieces, each moving with uncanny synchronicity. Drones surged forward, adjusted as one, then retreated in perfect arcs when struck. It looked efficient, unstoppable, yet Harker's tone cut through the illusion. "Show me," Holt said. The tactical map expanded. Lines of light threaded across space like veins running through a body, connecting one fleet to the next. A central pulse repeated every few seconds, each command rippling outward. Garrett frowned, leaning against the rail, grease still streaked across his jaw from the engineering deck. Centralized networks mean less room for independent error. They can coordinate 900 fleets like one hand. But it also means... He let the words trail off. Harker finished it. "If we break the relay, we don't face one hand anymore. We face 900 fists punching in different directions." The bridge fell quiet. Rourke's young face paled as he leaned closer to his comms panel. "With respect, sir, how do we even touch that? One ship? Against a grid built to handle entire armadas?" Callan's scarred eye narrowed, his tone skeptical. "Feels like suicide inside suicide. We're already one ship against 900. Now you want us to poke the hornet's nest?" Holt rested his hands on the rail, his gaze steady. "I don't want us to. We may have to." The men turned toward him, confusion and unease simmering in their silence. Holt continued. "Numbers win wars when both sides play the same game. We can't play theirs. That relay is their strength, but also their weakness. They've built efficiency at the cost of resilience. Strike it, and their coordination collapses. They'll still outgun us, but they won't outthink us, and doubt will creep in." Garrett shook his head. "You're asking us to thread a needle from miles away while being fired on from every direction. One mistake, and we don't cripple their grid. We just expose ourselves." Holt's eyes fixed on him. "And if we don't try, Garrett? Then they march in step, 900 fleets moving like a single blade, and Earth is carved apart before anyone can resist. We're not here to win. We're here to leave a scar deep enough to remind them humanity doesn't die quietly." The words sat heavy across the bridge. They weren't dramatic, they were factual, and that gave them weight. Harker's display pulsed again. "Sir, I can map the rhythm. Their commands cycle on intervals. If we align our strike to coincide with the grid's refresh, we can force a cascade. Even one hit at the right point could ripple." His voice faltered slightly. "But timing must be exact. Margin is smaller than anything we've attempted before." Rourke exhaled, his hands trembling on the console. "Exact timing, under fire, with systems all were." Eddie stressed. "That's..." He cut himself off when Holt's eyes shifted to him. "It's what we've been handed," Holt said firmly. "No one else is coming. Neptune burned, Mars bled, Titan collapsed. This is us. This is now. If we don't take the shot, we'll regret it even as this ship dies." Callan shifted his stance, crossing his arms. "Then give it straight, Commander. Do you believe we can reach it?" Holt didn't hesitate. "Yes. Not because our ship is stronger, because their arrogance has blinded them. They believe humanity broken. They don't see us as capable of touching their core. That's why we can." The room steadied with those words. The men still feared the risk, but they believed the logic. Holt straightened, his voice carrying across the deck. "We're not fighting to survive this day. We're fighting so that when the Dominion remembers Earth, they remember a scar that never faded. Break their grid, and even if this ship falls, the legend of Vanguard will live. That legend will carry further than victory." The bridge remained silent, not with hesitation now, but with resolve. Officers returned to their stations, focus hardening. The fear hadn't vanished. It had been reshaped into purpose. Holt allowed himself one final glance at Earth, the blue orb turning slowly below, its clouds flashing with faint reflections of the bombardment above. He imagined the families huddled underground, the children covering their ears against the distant rumble. He spoke softly, almost to himself, but every man heard it. We don't fight to save ourselves. We fight so they never forget us. The men carried those words back into their work, each keystroke sharper, each breath steadier. The Dominion grid still pulsed across the canopy, a living system of light and power. It seemed unbreakable. Yet for the first time, the crew of Vanguard saw it differently, not as inevitability, but as opportunity. Their closing, Commander, forward squadrons peeling from format says, "Ion charging straight into our corridor." Lieutenant Harker's call carried over the bridge, his voice stripped of hesitation. Darius Holt didn't ask for confirmation. He saw it himself, the Dominion symbols multiplying across the laser plasma display, red arcs collapsing into a spear point aimed directly at Vanguard. The earlier hesitation had vanished. The enemy meant to crush the last human warship under sheer weight. "Helm, evasive pattern 3, Holt ordered. His tone remained calm, though inside his chest a hard rhythm had begun to build. "Gunnery crews, fire control at my mark, not before." The canopy filled with streaks of light as energy lances sliced through the darkness. The Dominion wasn't saturating orbit anymore. They were aiming directly at Holt's ship. The deck convulsed under impact. Sparks spat from an overhead conduit, showering the nearest station in flashes of heat. Ensign Rourke threw up an arm to shield his face, his headset clattering against the floor. The recycled air filled with the tang of scorched insulation, sharp enough to sting the throat. "Shield projectors are buckling," shouted Garrett from engineering control. He slapped his console with a grease-darkened palm. "We can't take another volley in this posture." "Then don't be there when it lands," Holt snapped back. The helmsman jerked Vanguard into a hard lateral roll. Gravity harnesses strained against the crew's bodies, straps biting into shoulders. The ship lurched sideways, Dominion fire tearing through the empty space they had occupied a heartbeat earlier. "Now," Holt said. The gunnery deck roared alive. Autocannons thundered, their fire stitching across the enemy's interceptors. Bursts of plasma lit the canopy like flares, tearing drones apart in clusters. For every one destroyed, 3 more pressed forward. The deck jolted again. This time it wasn't a glancing strike. A Dominion energy lance raked across Vanguard's side, and the bridge shook violently. Holt gripped the rail until his knuckles ached, forcing himself to remain upright as officers slammed into their restraints. The sharp scent of burning polymers filled the room as warning lights flared across the displays. "Starboard flank scored," Harker barked. "Hull holding but secondary armor gone. Casualties reported on Deck 6. The words landed heavier than the impact. "Details," Holt demanded. A moment's pause as the data fed through. "Corporal Venn, dead. 2 gunners injured. Critical." The name cut deeper than Holt expected. He had spoken to Venn just hours earlier, the corporal's laughter still echoing in his memory as the man joked about Titan's food rations being tougher than Dominion fire. Now he was gone, erased in the space of a second. Holt forced the thought down, but the burn it left behind only sharpened his resolve. "Deck 6 reports fire contained," another officer called. "Medical team en route." "Keep your post steady," Holt said, his voice cold, anchoring the room before grief could spread. "Vanguard lives while we breathe. Remember that." Another wave of enemy fire struck, battering the shields. A drone exploded against the forward armor, rattling the bridge with a concussive thud that left men's ears ringing. The vibration ran through boots, into bones. "Return fire! Port batteries!" Holt commanded. The guns spat again. This time the Dominion paid. 3 interceptors tore open under concentrated flak, their debris scattering into the path of the vessels behind them. For a heartbeat, the spear point faltered. Garrett shouted over the chaos. "Commander, we can't keep trading like this. We'll be bled dry before the main fleets even arrive." Holt turned to him, eyes hard. "Then we don't trade. We strike." Be where it matters. He pivoted toward the comms station. Rourke, signal engineering, begin prepping the captured torpedoes. Full modification sequence. I want disruptor cores aligned for integration. The young officer blinked, momentarily stunned. Sir, those are unstable. We've never tested them under live combat. Holt's reply cut through like steel. Every man on this ship knew we'd use every weapon we had. This is the moment. Send it. Rourke swallowed, then bent to his panel, hands shaking but steady enough to carry the command. Another impact rocked the deck, slamming men against their restraints. Sparks rained down again, the taste of burnt plastic clinging to the tongue. Someone cried out, a technician clutching his leg, crimson spreading across his trousers where shrapnel had caught him. Callan rushed forward, hauling the man upright and passing him to two others. Get him to med bay, now! The technician's eyes were wide, but he forced himself to nod, lips pressed tight to keep from crying out. Holt didn't look away. He couldn't. Each casualty etched itself into him, a ledger he carried in silence. Enemy squadron circling for another run, Harker warned. They're adapting, angling to pin us from both flanks. Helm, roll us under their arc, Holt ordered. His mind ran calculations faster than his heart allowed. Every maneuver cost energy, every shot drained reserves, every second risked more lives. Yet every death also burned deeper fuel in him. He would not let them die for nothing. The ship dove, Dominion fire slicing overhead, missing by meters. The bridge crew felt their harnesses drag against their shoulders, stomachs lurching as inertia clawed at their insides. Holt's hand never left the rail. Status on torpedo prep? Rourke's voice came back, steady despite the tremor in it. Engineering confirms integration has begun. They'll need time. Buy it, H, Holt said. The crew heard the finality in his tone. There would be no retreat, no reprieve. Their job now was to survive long enough to ready the one weapon that might shatter the Dominion's illusion of invulnerability. Another blast struck Vanguard's underside, jolting the entire frame. The lights dimmed briefly before emergency circuits stabilized. Secondary coolant lines ruptured, Garrett shouted. I'll have a team on it. Keep those bastards off us while I patch. Go, Holt ordered. He watched Garrett storm out with two engineers, the sound of their boots fading into the chaotic rhythm of the bridge. For a brief moment, Holt closed his eyes. Behind the flashes of combat, he saw Ven's grin, the faces of the two gunners fighting for their lives in medbay, the technician biting his lip against pain, each image hammered into him, welding his determination into something unbreakable. He opened his eyes again, voice low but clear. They think we're already finished. Make sure they choke on that mistake. And as the Dominion wave regrouped for another pass, Vanguard turned into the storm again, bleeding but unbowed, its crew clinging to purpose that grew sharper with every life lost. Commander, torpedoes nearly ready, but we'll need more time. Garrett's voice came through the comms, heavy with strain, as if every word was spoken while pulling something into place with bare hands. Darius Holt didn't hesitate. Then I'll buy you time. He turned sharply toward Ensign Rourke at communications. The young man's knuckles were white against his console, his lips pressed tight as the Dominion's red markers swarmed closer across the laser plasma displays. Holt's tone was low, deliberate, carrying the gravity of command. Broadcast the instability signal, full spectrum. Make sure every ship in that armada hears it. Rourke froze. Sir, are you certain? His eyes widened, and for a moment, he looked more like a boy than an officer. Holt leaned closer, his words cutting clean. They fear one thing above all else. Remind them of it. The bridge crew stiffened, realization dawning. They knew the stories, early battles when the Dominion had underestimated primitive human reactors, ships captured, containment sabotaged, entire fleets shredded by chain reactions they couldn't predict. Back then, the Dominion had paid in blood for their arrogance. Even centuries later, those scars had carved themselves into doctrine. Rourke swallowed hard, then keyed the sequence. Across space, Vanguard's transmissions changed. Static-laced reports blared outward, carrying forged data streams, rising heat curves, reactor spikes, containment readings spiraling into danger. To anyone listening, Vanguard now looked like a warship seconds away from tearing itself apart in uncontrolled fury. The effect was immediate. Dominion squadrons slowed. Assault arcs wavered. Drone swarms halted mid-flight, their operators pulling them back with almost frantic precision. Entire formations began to spread apart, widening gaps between vessels, their perfect cohesion unraveling under the shadow of panic. "They're reacting," Harker whispered, awe and disbelief mingling in his voice. "They're pulling back. Commander, it's working." Sparks still hissed from wounded consoles, the air tinged with the acrid bite of scorched polymers, but for the first time since the bombardment began, silence settled across the bridge. It wasn't peace. It was the silence of hesitation, of an enemy forced to think twice. Sergeant Callan barked a laugh, harsh and disbelieving. 900 fleets, scared of one unstable reactor. Never thought I'd live to see it. Holt's eyes narrowed. They're not scared of us. They're scared of themselves. Every commander out there remembers the old chain reactions. They won't risk being Saros, the one who triggers another massacre. He let the words hang, then spoke with sharper edge. That fear is our weapon now. The displays confirmed it. Enemy formations that had once moved like clockwork now drifted unevenly. Some squadrons backed away entirely, others hovered uncertain, awaiting commands that came too slow. The flawless machine of Dominion war had stuttered. Garrett's voice returned from engineering, ragged but triumphant. "Commander, we've got the first pair of modified torpedoes online. Integration complete. They'll fly dirty, but they'll fly." "Good," Holt said, his tone steady, almost cold. "Keep working. I want the next batch ready before they recover their rhythm." Rourke turned, his face pale. "Sir, if they realize the signal is false, then they'll come harder," Holt interrupted. "But by then, their hesitation will have given us the openings we need. Fear buys time. Time buys weapons. Weapons buy consequence. That's how we survive this long enough to matter." The young officer nodded, throat tight, then returned to his panel. Another tremor rattled through the deck as stray fire slammed into orbit nearby. Warning lights pulsed briefly before systems stabilized. Men clenched teeth, gripping rails, holding to their stations as the storm continued outside. But the mood had shifted. Where dread had pressed earlier, now there was something different. Recognition that Holt had turned myth into strategy, using old scars of war to stall a superpower. Callan crossed his arms, his voice gravelly. "Never thought lies would save us better than guns." Holt shot him a look, voice low. "It isn't a lie. It's a story they already believe. I just gave them reason to remember it." Harker exhaled through clenched teeth, studying the readouts. "If this bluff holds, Commander, we may just have enough room to target the relay grid." "That's the point," Holt said. His hand tightened on the railing, the leather of his gloves creaking faintly. "Every second they hesitate is a second closer to, the shot that breaks their spine." The canopy filled again with distant flashes as Dominion vessels pulled wider, arcs of light breaking apart their once perfect wall. The enemy had blinked, and in that hesitation, Vanguard had carved its place in history. Holt turned back to his officers, his voice carrying across the bridge with a calm steadiness that anchored them all. "Gunners, prepare firing solutions. Engineering, keep pushing the torpedoes online. Comms, maintain the instability signal. Let them think death is seconds away." The men answered with nods, sharper movements, and renewed focus. Holt's eyes remained on the canopy. He thought of the children in bunkers below, of families praying the ground wouldn't shatter under them. He thought of Ven, gone on Deck 6, and the gunners in medbay fighting for their lives. Each memory sharpened the moment. He whispered under his breath, unheard by anyone but himself. "If fear is all we have left to wield, then let it cut deep." "Commander, torpedoes are locked on the relay coordinates." Lieutenant Harker's voice cracked through the tension, his eyes darting between streams of data on the laser plasma display. Trajectory aligned, firing window narrow. If we wait another cycle, we may lose it. Darius Holt rose from his chair, hands firm against the rail. The Dominion armada still hung before them in suffocating numbers, a wall of red symbols filling the canopy. Yet there, woven through the mass, pulsed the lattice of light that bound them together, a web of command too rigid to bend, too fragile to endure a cut. "Fire," Holt ordered. The deck shuddered as Vanguard's launch tubes spat their improvised weapons into the void. 4 torpedoes screamed away, their trails burning against the darkness. They weren't sleek like Dominion ordnance. They looked patched together, ugly, their casings warped by rushed integration. Yet each carried a heart of stolen technology, twisted into something meant to tear the enemy apart from within. "Tracking. Stable," Rourke said, his voice tight. "All 4 inbound to relay nodes." Seconds crawled. The bridge crew leaned forward unconsciously, breath caught in throats, every pair of eyes fixed on the displays. Then, impact. 1 torpedo detonated directly against a relay cluster, its disruptor payload rippling outward in waves of violent distortion. The second tore into the grid's outer shell, shattering transmission hubs in bursts of light. The third veered wide but still clipped a supporting node, scattering its feed across half a sector. The fourth slammed through debris and vanished into the heart of the network, its explosion blooming like a wound. The effect was instant. On the displays, the Dominion formation flickered. Entire squadrons froze mid-maneuver, their commands severed. Ships began drifting out of alignment, colliding with each other as orders arrived seconds too late. Drones spun out of control, some slamming directly into their own carriers. What had been flawless choreography collapsed into a chaos of hesitation and misfire. "Grid collapse detected," Harker shouted, his hands gripping the console with white knuckles. "Their intervals are fractured. Orders aren't syncing. They're hitting each other." The canopy lit with violent sparks as 2 Dominion frigates collided, their shields flaring before both broke apart in fire. Another squadron launched too late, their drones smashing into the sterns of their allies. Perfect order had become stumbling confusion. Callan let out a bark of disbelief. "Look at them, scattering like cattle." Holt raised a hand. "Stay focused. This isn't victory, it's opportunity." The bridge vibrated under another hit, this one glancing off their weakened shields. Warning lights strobed across the room, bathing men in flashes of red. The victory outside hadn't silenced the storm, it had only turned it inward. Garrett's voice rang through the comms from engineering. "Commander, disruptor feedback is bleeding into our systems. The core's stability margin is shrinking fast." "How long?" Holt asked. A pause, filled with static and the faint roar of machinery. "Minutes, if we keep pushing power like this, maybe less." Holt closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with sharpened resolve. "Then every second matters more now." On the displays, the Dominion's cracks widened. Coalition vessels from different species began breaking into their own patterns. Some retreated outright, unwilling to fight without clear command. Others lashed out blindly, their weapons striking allies as often as enemies. The bridge filled with overlapping reports, misfires, collisions, entire wings refusing to advance. Rourke's voice shook with awe. "They can't hold it together. 900 fleets, and without that grid they're nothing but noise." Holt's reply was steady, cutting through the rising tide of voices. "They're not nothing. They're still stronger than us. But now they're stronger apart. And that is enough." The crew absorbed his words, the truth sobering them even as adrenaline spiked. The ship groaned under the strain of its own reactor, the recycled air biting their throats with heat, sweat clinging beneath their uniforms. Every man could feel the clock tightening around them. Callan's eye fixed on Holt. "If the core fails, Commander, what then?" Holt met his gaze without wavering. "Then we make sure it fails in the right place." The sergeant held that stare for a long second, then nodded, understanding more than the words revealed. Harker's console beeped violently, cutting through the heavy silence. "Sir, the Dominion's trying to reroute through auxiliary relays. If they succeed, they'll patch some of the network back online." "Then we strike again," Holt said. His tone carried no hesitation, no fatigue. "Garrett, keep prepping more torpedoes. I don't care if you tear the ship apart getting them armed. We hold this wound open until it festers." The comm crackled with Garrett's reply. "Understood. But Commander, every launch shaves life off our core. You'll burn us down to embers." Holt's voice was grim, resolute. "Then we'll burn in a place they'll never forget." The words settled across the bridge like iron. Outside, the Dominion fractured further. Carriers abandoned their escorts, dreadnoughts fired into empty space, and destroyers slammed broadside into each other as coordination disintegrated. For the first time, the invincible armada looked human, messy, divided, bleeding from its own arrogance. Holt watched the canopy, the firestorms reflecting in his eyes. He thought of the dead already carried on his ledger, the men in medbay clinging to life, the families below who couldn't see this chaos but would one day hear it in whispered stories. He thought of Earth itself, bruised and broken, staring upward with fear. His jaw tightened. Let them remember this day not as the moment Earth died, but as the day their empire stumbled. And as Vanguard prepared its next strike, Holt knew time was slipping away, not only for the Dominion, but for his ship, his men, and himself. The reactor's heartbeat was failing. The only question left was how to turn that death into a weapon. "Multiple warships are breaking from formation, straight at us!" Rourke's shout carried across the bridge, sharp as broken glass. Holt tightened his grip on the railing. On the canopy, Dominion icons surged forward, no longer in neat formations but in jagged thrusts, each captain acting on fury rather than orders. "Then they've decided to stop hiding behind the grid," he said, his voice like iron. "Bring us to engagement range, every gun we have." The ship lurched as thrusters flared, throwing sparks from overhead conduits. Alarms bit into the ears of the crew. Heat radiated off consoles as Vanguard angled itself toward the oncoming swarm. Len barked over the comms from the gunnery decks. "CIWS batteries armed, flak spread ready. Give the word, Commander." "Fire at will," the ship roared with life. Close-in defense turrets spat streams of tungsten, streaking arcs that tore into the first Dominion frigates. Explosions rippled across enemy hulls, fragments slamming against Vanguard's plating like hailstones on glass. The impact rattled teeth and sent vibrations deep into the soles of boots. Harker's hands flew across his console. "Uploading false reactor instability codes now." His forehead glistened, sweat running down into his eyes, but he didn't slow. "They're seeing our core on the edge of detonation." "Good," Holt said. "Keep feeding them panic." On the displays, half a squadron veered off, uncertain, but others pressed closer, their commanders willing to risk annihilation if it meant striking the Vanguard. The first ram came from the starboard side, an angular Dominion corvette scraping across Vanguard's armor with a sound like tearing steel. The jolt knocked men from their feet. Lights flickered, and somewhere in the hull a bulkhead groaned under the strain. Garrett's voice cut in from engineering, ragged. "Starboard armor compromised. Plating peeled back. If another rams the same section, we'll breach." "Reroute structural supports," Holt ordered, steady despite the chaos. "I don't care if the frames glow red. Hold that side." "Aye, Commander, but it'll cook half the conduits." "Then let it cook." Callan's weapons sang again, flak bursting in tight cones. A Dominion destroyer's bridge erupted, scattering fragments into the void. Shards pattered against Vanguard's bow, 1,000 knives across its skin. The ship shook with every near hit, and the recycled air inside carried the taste of copper and burnt plastic, searing lungs. Harker snapped around from his console, face pale. "Sir, their dreadnought is charging main batteries." "Angle the nose down," Holt commanded. Bleed speed, make it overshoot. The maneuver threw bodies against restraints as Vanguard pitched hard. The dreadnought's beams seared overhead, close enough to paint the canopy white for a heartbeat. The shockwave rattled the ship, panels dropping from the ceiling, sparks showering the crew. Rourke cursed under his breath. That was closer than I like. Holt's reply was clipped, absolute. Close is all we're going to get today. Another Dominion cruiser closed in, its hull bristling with gun ports. Holt leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Ramming profile. On my mark, hit them with port thrusters. We're not letting them board us. The crew looked at him, stunned. Callan's voice cracked. You mean to hit them head on? I mean to tear their teeth out before they bite. Seconds later, Vanguard slammed its flank into the cruiser's midsection. The impact reverberated through bones and consoles alike. Men cried out as restraints bit into their shoulders. The Dominion vessel split open, fire curling from its wounds, its broken hull tumbling away into nothingness. But the cost was heavy. Vanguard's bow was mangled, alarms screamed across the bridge, and coolant sprayed in misty arcs from ruptured pipes. The stench of hot chemicals burned nostrils, mixing with the tang of sweat and blood. Garrett shouted over the din, his voice raw. Structural limits exceeded. We can't take another collision like that. We won't, Holt said, though his jaw was clenched tight. But neither will they. Outside, the battlefield had become a storm. Close-range gunfire turned the darkness into a furnace of light. Fragments of Dominion hulls spun in ragged arcs, colliding with allies, gouging wounds into once proud ships. Dreadnoughts lumbered forward without guidance, their salvos striking friend and foe alike. Every explosion illuminated faces on the bridge in flashes. Rourke's fear twisted into defiance, Harker's desperate focus, Ilan's clenched jaw as he shouted firing solutions. Each man bore the truth. This wasn't survival anymore. This was about how long they could keep standing. A sharp blast shook the deck. Medbay reports poured in, dozens injured, several killed outright by collapsed sections. Holt's throat tightened, but he forced his focus forward. Their sacrifice could not be wasted on hesitation. He leaned toward the comm. Keep broadcasting instability codes. Let them believe one stray shot will ignite us all. Fear is our shield now. Harker nodded, voice hoarse. Transmission continuous. They're hesitating, even at this range. On the canopy, Holt saw it. Some Dominion captains faltering, throttling back just enough to widen gaps in their line. But others surged forward, bloodlust overriding caution. Commander, Callan called, his tone unflinching despite the quiver in his hand. We can't hold forever. Holt looked at him, at every man on that bridge, and allowed the weight of their truth to settle. His voice dropped, steady and low, carrying more power than any shout. We don't hold forever. We hold long enough. The crew absorbed the words and something hardened in them. Fear didn't vanish, but it twisted into resolve. Outside, another Dominion frigate burst under concentrated CIWS fire, its fragments raining against Vanguard like fiery snow. The ship buckled but held. Vanguard bled, but it still fought. And as the Dominion captains clawed forward without unity, Holt saw the opening forming in their chaos. His reactor was dying, his men were breaking, but their defiance was carving history into the bones of the enemy. The pushback had begun. Reactor control just redlined, Commander. She's going to blow. Garrett's voice rattled across the intercom, raw from smoke and exhaustion. I can keep her caged for minutes, maybe less. After that, she decides for us. The bridge fell silent. Every officer stared at Holt as though waiting for him to conjure a miracle. Holt studied the numbers cascading across the laser plasma displays. Core temperatures leapt upward in cruel increments. Cooling channels had collapsed in 3 sectors. Magnetic containment was cracking like glass under a hammer. He exhaled once, steady and long. We've carried this ship further than anyone believed possible, he said, his tone neither broken nor raised. But we've reached the end of what repairs can hold, which means we make the choice of how she dies. The crew shifted, uneasy but listening. Rourke swallowed hard, his jaw clenched. You mean a charge? Holt nodded. A direct push into their densest cluster. Our reactor can take half their forward fleet with it. Maybe more if the gods of physics favor us. The words hung heavy. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the stutter of ruptured ventilation pushing warm air into the cabin. Callan leaned forward, eyes shadowed. And us? Holt's gaze didn't waver. Pods. Every one of you gets a seat. That order isn't optional. Harker shook his head in disbelief. In this crossfire? They'll be hunted down before they clear 5 clicks. They won't if the vanguard draws every eye, Holt countered. His voice cut through doubt like a blade. Our detonation will blind their sensors long enough to scatter pods into the debris field. It's not safe. It's not certain. But it gives you a chance. Silence again. This time it was thicker, heavier, weighted by choices no man ever wanted to make. Garrett broke it, his voice hoarse but firm over comms. Then we'll make those pods hold. I'll rig secondary thrusters from stripped conduits. It'll look ugly, but it'll push them farther than the Dominion expects. Callan's lips trembled, but his words came sharp. If anyone can jury-rig a lifeboat into a warhead, it's you, Gare. A few strained chuckles cut the tension, but the humor didn't last. Holt straightened, looking at every face. I won't lie. You all know what's coming. This ship doesn't limp away from today. But your lives aren't spent yet. The Dominion must never believe humanity rolls over. They must carry scars that remind them every time they marshal fleets that we bite back. Rourke's fists tightened until his knuckles whitened. His reply was steady, almost reverent. Then let them remember the vanguard. Around the bridge, the words settled into bone. Not shouted, not cheered, simply accepted. Carved into the resolve of men and women who knew there was no other path. Holt turned toward his console. He keyed a secure channel, locking the override into his command codes. Each press echoed in his chest like a nail driven into a coffin. Core override authorization, Holt, Elias. Transfer helm lock to primary. The system acknowledged with a low tone and a new display opened. A crimson pathway guiding the ship straight into the heart of the enemy mass. Harker's throat tightened. Sir, you've just given her to yourself alone. No one else can steer her now. That's the point, Holt replied quietly. Once pods launch, I'll guide us in. You'll be gone by then. A sharp protest rose in Callan's voice. You think we'll abandon you? Yes. Holt's reply was iron. Because it's my place to end what I started, and because you'll carry the story forward. If humanity hears the Vanguard's final act from anyone, it must be those who survived to see it. His words cut deeper than any order. They weren't barked commands, but truths the crew couldn't shake. Rourke drew a long breath, then nodded once. Understood, Commander. His voice carried the weight of every man and woman on the bridge. The deck trembled again as another volley grazed their aft plating. Sparks showered from a shattered pane. L. The ship groaned like a wounded animal forced to rise one more time. Holt's hand brushed the railing, feeling the heat of the metal against his palm, as though Vanguard itself knew what he had chosen for it. He lowered his voice, speaking not just to his crew, but to the ship around him. You've given us more than we deserved. One last strike, and then rest. The crew moved with quiet urgency. Garrett sprinted from engineering toward the life pod clusters, barking orders at his techs. Callan's gunners stripped ammunition to lighten pods, tossing belts of shells aside. Rourke uploaded navigational markers to the pod systems, routing them into the chaos of drifting wreckage where Dominion sensors faltered. The bridge itself became eerily calm, the kind of quiet that follows decisions too large for shouting. Harker lingered at his station, fingers hovering over his console. Sir, I'd stay if you ordered it. Holt's stare softened for the first time. I won't waste another life for something already decided. Get to your pod. Harker's jaw flexed, then he saluted, not stiff but heartfelt, before stepping away. As the last of the crew filtered toward the ejection corridors, Holt remained alone at the helm. He touched the heads-up displays, watching Dominion icons cluster like wolves tightening around a wounded prey. His pulse slowed. Fear dulled. All that remained was clarity. For the first time, Holt let himself imagine Earth. The gray oceans at dawn, winds off the coastlines, children laughing in cities still unscarred. He let those visions anchor him, stronger than any tactical calculation. He whispered, meant for no ears but his own, "You'll live. That's enough." The countdown for pod dispersal lit across the overhead display. Holt locked the helm, tethering his life to Vanguard's reactor. The decision was made. The ship would die, but the memory of her defiance would not. Target corridor locked. "Their densest wall is straight ahead," Holt muttered, fingers wrapping tight around the manual yoke. The bridge was nearly empty now, stripped of every officer but him. Only the harsh glow of the laser plasma displays lit his face, washing it in alternating streaks of amber and crimson. The Dominion ships bristled before him like an iron forest, overlapping fields of fire waiting to tear his vessel apart. Plasma lances arced across the void, dazzling streaks that illuminated drifting wrecks. Each flash painted the cockpit in violent strobing light, and Holt guided Vanguard straight into it. The ship lurched as enemy fire grazed her flanks, vibrations running through the deck like hammer strikes. A shower of sparks burst from a panel overhead, falling across his shoulders in a rain of glowing dust. He barely blinked. His gaze remained fixed on the targeting lane. "Come on, girl," he whispered to the ship, as if coaxing a dying horse to run one last mile. "One more charge." The heads-up display bloomed with new warnings. Reactor temperature had entered the collapse band. Containment fields shimmered erratically, each fluctuation echoing in the dull ache building at the base of Holt's skull. Every nerve in his body felt tuned to the ship's agony, as though his own bones strained under the same unbearable weight. A new indicator pulsed. Pod release. Sequence initiated. Through auxiliary feeds, he saw them scatter, life pods streaking away like sparks cast from a grinding wheel. Tiny capsules ignited their thrusters, darting into clouds of debris that still swirled from earlier battles. Holt maneuvered Vanguard deliberately between those pods and the enemy, placing his massive, dying ship as a shield even in her last charge. Dominion warships responded in kind. Beams and torpedoes converged, trying to swat pods from existence, but Vanguard's bulk drew their wrath. Plasma tore across her hull. Plates buckled. Bulkhead has collapsed. The deck beneath Holt trembled as if the ship screamed with every strike. His console rattled under his grip. The yoke jerked against his palms, the steel edges biting into calloused skin. "Stay with me," he snarled aloud, not at the crew who had gone, but at the machine itself. He could taste copper in his mouth from a split lip where a panel explosion had thrown him forward moments earlier. Blood mixed with sweat, metallic warmth sliding down to his chin. Ahead, Dominion icons clustered on the display, ships layered in overlapping formations, an armada confident that numbers guaranteed survival. Holt tightened his jaw. He adjusted the helm with deliberate slowness, lining Vanguard on a path not toward their edge, but into their very heart. The closer he pushed, the brighter the battlefield grew. Every blast burned into his retinas, leaving ghost trails of blue and white. The reek of scorched wiring filled the cabin, sharp enough to sting his sinuses. Heat pressed at his cheeks, thick as a furnace draft, each breath heavy and rasping in his lungs. "Reactor breach in 90 seconds, the system droned. "That's 90 seconds too long for them," Holt said. His voice came out low, almost conversational, as though speaking to an old friend. Another salvo ripped across the starboard wing. Holt slammed the yoke sideways, and the Vanguard twisted with surprising grace for a dying beast. The maneuver carved a hole through enemy fire, sending 2 Dominion frigates colliding as they overcorrected. The collision bloomed into a violent fireball, fragments tumbling past his viewport like meteors breaking from a storm. Holt adjusted course again, threading the vanguard between wreckage and incoming fire with the precision of a surgeon guiding a blade. His heartbeat slowed, each thump resonating with the rhythm of the ship. In the distance, more pods vanished into the shadows of wreckage fields. Holt tracked them briefly, relief pricking at his chest. At lay, east some would escape this slaughter. Core containment breach in 60 seconds. The heads-up display now painted the center of the Dominion fleet in bright overlays, marking clusters of capital ships that relayed orders to the swarm. Holt's lips tightened. That was the place. One strike there, and their command lattice would unravel like a cut net. He guided Vanguard lower, under the arcs of a destroyer line, so close that the hull groaned under shockwaves of nearby detonations. Alarms shrieked with every near miss. The smell of insulation smoke grew sharper, clawing at his throat. He coughed, blinked tears away, and pressed forward. The console began to flicker. Controls lagged, then re-engaged. Holt slammed both hands down, stabilizing input. His muscles shook from the strain of holding the yoke steady as feedback jolts rattled his arms. Another Dominion cruiser loomed ahead, massive cannons pivoting to cut him down. Holt gritted his teeth and drove straight at it. His thumb hit the manual fire. Vanguard's flak batteries screamed one final barrage, saturating the cruiser's bridge in furious bursts. Armor shattered, hull split wide, spilling glowing debris into the void. Holt pulled hard, sliding Vanguard past its broken carcass, the sides scraping close enough that sparks streaked across his viewport. Containment breach in 30 seconds. He tasted salt and iron as blood trickled down the back of his throat. The display blurred at the edges, yet his hands held steady. Each adjustment carried him deeper into the Dominion core, threading tighter formations, cutting through their most guarded cluster. Alarms crescendoed. The entire deck quivered, threatening to throw him from the chair. A groan like tortured steel echoed through the vessel. Containment breach in 20 seconds. Holt leaned forward, sweat dripping into his eyes, stinging them raw. Hold together, Fall. Army, Vanguard, just a little farther. The final cluster came into view. Dominion capital ships sat ringed in concentric formation, pulsing with energy discharges, their hulls glinting from the fury of battle. Containment breach in 10. His grip locked white on the yoke. The path lay straight, unavoidable, irreversible. Holt smiled, not with triumph, but with calm certainty. Let history write that humanity did not flinch. Vanguard plunged forward, engines howling, reactor burning hotter than any star. The last life pod counter winked off the display, every crewman away. The ship roared into the Dominion's center like an arrow into flesh. Containment breach in 3, 2. The display washed white. Open all channels, Holt ordered, his voice a gravel rasp carried across a bridge that no longer had a crew to hear him. The command linked directly into the laser plasma relays, still alive within the ship's crumbling core. Warning klaxons bled into the background, but he ignored them, steadying his breath. On the heads-up display, Dominion ship identifiers swarmed in tangled clusters, their own relays fractured and unstable. Orders conflicted, lines of authority buckled. Their fleet hung suspended between fury and panic. Holt leaned into the mic, every syllable sharpened by discipline. "This is Vanguard Command," he said with quiet certainty. "You are facing the forward guard only. Earth's second line is already in position." He adjusted dials with bleeding fingers, crafting the false overlay. Ghost fleet signatures multiplied across Dominion channels, dozens of phantom human warships blooming into existence like cold stars igniting. The broken Dominion grid, already choking on fractured signals, accepted the lie without resistance. "Your sensors confirm what I say," Holt continued, tone as steady as if briefing cadets in a classroom. "Stand down, or you will be erased." His words cut through the static, each O, and delivered with surgical weight. He did not raise his voice, did not taunt, did not plead. He simply stated facts that the enemy could neither prove nor dismiss. Across the fractured armada, responses rippled. The heads-up display painted chaotic bursts of chatter. Captains questioning, commanders demanding verification, species squabbling over whether the ghost readings spelled doom or deception. Hulls swung out of formation, turrets wheeled towards supposed phantom threats. Holt could see it unravel strand by strand. Another violent tremor shuddered through Vanguard. The deck pitched, throwing him hard against the console. Blood trickled from his temple, warm against cooling skin. Reactor readouts pulsed scarlet, digits racing upward. Containment breach in 15 seconds. He smiled faintly. Plenty of time. He pressed the transmit key again. This is Captain Elias Holt of Earth's Vanguard. Remember my words when you count your losses. Remember that humanity gave you this chance to run. His throat burned, not from fear, but from smoke seeping up through ruptured conduits. Sparks hissed above his head, casting flickering shadows across his face. He inhaled once, deeply, ignoring the sting in his lungs. The ship's bones groaned around him, but he sat upright, calm as if strapped into a classroom simulator. Containment breach in 10. Outside, through the fractured viewport, Dominion cruisers loomed, hulking silhouettes backlit by firestorms. Their guns all turned toward him now, but none fired. Confusion gripped them. Their officers stared at ghost signals flickering across their corrupted networks, wondering if doom already encircled them. Containment breach in 5. Holt closed his eyes, one hand resting firm on the yoke, the other over the transmission key. For a fleeting heartbeat, he thought of the cadets he'd trained, of the laughter in Earth's academies, of the morning air on mountain ranges untouched by Dominion boots. He gave them one last breath. Vanguard, signing off. The core tore free of its housing, a light brighter than any sun ignited within the belly of the ship. The blast swallowed the bridge, Holt's body, and the final whisper of his voice. The explosion erupted outward in a chain reaction that consumed everything nearby. Dominion capital ships shattered in cascading eruptions, their armored hulls peeled apart like shells crushed in a giant's fist. Fire ripped across their formations, chewing through escorts, igniting magazines, unraveling their proud symmetry into chaos. Sensors across the sector went dark as Dominion relays buckled under the storm. From the viewpoint of fleeing life pods, the detonation unfurled like a blooming inferno, a single stroke carving through the enemy's heart. Their escape canopies vibrated with the force, light washing across their tear-streaked faces as they shielded eyes from the glare. For Dominion crews still alive, the confusion deepened into terror. Laser plasma displays filled with collapsing readouts, phantom fleets still haunting their scopes. Was the destruction wrought by one ship, or was the ghost armada already cutting them down? Captains screamed contradictory orders. Ships fled in jagged vectors, colliding, scattering, abandoning cohesion. The Vanguard was gone, but its shadow stretched over them all. Holt's final broadcast carried longer than the light of the explosion itself. His calm words, etched into corrupted logs, replayed endlessly across channels, convincing some Dominion officers that Earth's hidden strength had not even fired yet. In the smoking aftermath, dozens of their greatest capital ships had vanished. Hundreds more drifted crippled, scarred by shockwaves. And over it all lingered the last steady human voice they'd ever hear from that battle. Stand down, or you will be erased. The Dominion had seen annihilation and could not separate truth from illusion. There, turning on each other, whispered Lieutenant Marlowe, pressed against the curved viewport of the life pod. His voice quivered as if afraid the sight outside might shatter under words alone. Through the armored glass, survivors watched the impossible unfold. The Dominion's 900 fleets, ships vast enough to blot out stars, carriers whose spines stretched like floating citadels, escorts that once flew in flawless formation, now tore themselves apart in confusion. Command beams, once absolute, fractured into overlapping screams across the Dominion's crippled grid. Holt's false signatures still pulsed in their systems, a phantom Earth armada closing from all sides. On the laser plasma display inside the pod, clusters of alien commands blinked crimson as coalition captains hurled accusations across open channels. A Targathi admiral shrieked that the Shunkai had sabotaged their relays. The Shunkai, sick-eyed and cold-blooded, cursed back, demanding proof of loyalty. Charek's war leaders threatened withdrawal unless the phantom ships were destroyed first. The network devolved into a cacophony, each voice convinced betrayal had come from its supposed ally. "They're running," breathed Ensign Dela Cruz, tears streaking through soot on her face. She clutched the straps across her chest until her knuckles blanched. "They're actually pulling back." Outside, great wedges of Dominion capital ships rotated clumsily, plasma trails flaring as engines fired in panicked retreat. Collision after collision erupted where formations collapsed, hulks scraping across each other, igniting fires that bled across the darkness like torn arteries. From the lifepod's narrow cabin, the survivors could see Holt's sacrifice still burning into the enemy's bones. His broadcast, calm, deliberate, replayed in fragments on intercepted channels. The Dominion believed Earth had more ships hidden, and invisibs, the knife waiting for the next cut. Captain Reza, the senior officer among the survivors, leaned forward, one hand braced against the pod's control column. His face was streaked with grime, but his eyes were unflinching as he studied the heads-up feed of scattering fleets. 900 fleets, he muttered, voice heavy with disbelief. They came as conquerors. They leave as cowards. Silence filled the pod, broken only by the distant crackle of damaged circuits and the faint rasp of uneven breathing. Each survivor carried the same image in their mind. Holt's final words, spoken with the calm of a man who already knew the cost, now echoing in the fear of an empire. On the Dominion side, panic spiraled faster than command could restrain it. A Kytheran dreadnought captain ordered his flotilla to engage the hidden Earth fleet directly. When his guns struck only allies, the return fire annihilated 3 of his cruisers. In minutes, the Kytheron faction broke away entirely, retreating under cover of smoke and debris. That single rupture cracked the coalition's spine. Aboard the life pod, Corporal Jennings whispered as though confiding to a ghost. Holt did it. He shattered them. His hands shook, but his voice steadied. One man in one ship turned an empire backward. The pod jolted suddenly, buffeted by a shockwave as another Dominion carrier exploded, gutted by panicked friendly fire. The survivors clung to straps, hearts hammering. The viewport flashed white, then dimmed to reveal the unthinkable, a tide of Dominion ships accelerating away from Earth. Every fleeing engine painted streaks of fire across the black, thousands of drives burning toward safety. In their wake, shattered wreckage tumbled, skeletal hulls drifting aimless, once proud banners of conquest reduced to floating corpses. Ensign Dela Cruz pressed her forehead against the viewport, her tears mixing with sweat. We're alive because he chose not to be. Captain Reza's jaw tightened. No, we're alive because he understood them better than they understood themselves. He knew fear spreads faster than fire. For hours, the rout unfolded. Species turned on species, old grudges reignited under the stress of Holt's deception. Entire fleets abandoned formation without firing another shot. The once mighty Dominion, which had enslaved worlds and silenced rebellions with cold discipline, was now unraveling before the eyes of a handful of human survivors drifting in life pods. When the last visible armada finally disappeared into distant streaks of light, silence descended. Not a single enemy vessel remained in Earth's orbit. The space once thick with warships was now littered with wreckage, flames, and drifting bodies. Corporal Jennings whispered, "They fled from one man." Captain Reza shook his head slowly. No, they fled from an idea. Holt gave them something worse than death, doubt. Every survivor in that pod felt it. Gooseflesh rippled across skin, still bruised from the battle. They had witnessed history's fulcrum tilt. Holt's death had not simply destroyed ships. It had injected terror into the bloodstream of an empire. The survivors sat in silence, their breaths uneven, their bodies aching, but their hearts kindled by what they had seen. Lieutenant Marlowe finally spoke, his voice rough but steady. "If Earth ever builds monuments again, it won't be a statue. It will be this: 900 fleets running because one man refused to bow." The pod drifted, its beacon pulsing faintly into the void, while far in the distance, the once invincible Dominion scattered like shadows before the dawn. And for the first time since the war began, humanity looked up at the stars not with dread, but with the fierce, trembling awe of survivors who realized they might yet endure. "Pod beacon located, bringing them in." The retrieval officer's voice cracked with exhaustion as the grappling arms of the colony ship secured the battered life pod. Sparks showered when metal scraped against the docking clamps, but the survivors inside hardly noticed. They were too numb, too hollow from what they had just witnessed. When the hatch finally hissed open, blinding light spilled across soot-streaked faces. Medics rushed in, their gloves cool against burned skin, their stretchers rattling as they lifted bodies out one by one. Some resisted, clutching straps as if still expecting impact. Others clung to each other, refusing to let go until reassured the warship Vanguard truly was gone, and they were not drifting alone anymore. Captain Reza staggered last out of the pod, boots scraping against the floor. His legs trembled, but his gaze remained steady. "Get every pod you can," he ordered, his throat raw. "There are still more out there. Holt didn't die for fragments. He died so someone could tell it whole." On the command deck of the rescue ship, feeds from scattered pods poured in. Shaky hands held up recordings, grainy but undeniable. Holt's broadcast, his calm words cutting through the static, then the eruption of light as Vanguard detonated in the core of the Dominion armada. Those images spread within hours through every colony relay. By nightfall, they crossed every surviving settlement still loyal to Earth. Children who had been raised to expect only retreat now stared at the screens with wide eyes, their voices whispering Holt's final lines like prayers. Farmers in crumbling domes left their tools in the dust and watched fleets of aliens scatter in fear. Soldiers recovering in makeshift infirmaries raised fists, their bandages spotted with blood, shouting his name into the air as though he could still hear them. Inside the rescue ship's briefing chamber, our surviving officers sat in silence around a scarred table. The heads-up display on the wall cycled through intercepted Dominion transmissions. What they showed was chaos, command councils screaming over one another, governors calling fleets back to their home sectors, species accusing allies of treachery. The once iron Dominion was unraveling under its own paranoia. Lieutenant Marlowe leaned forward, hands gripping the table edge. "They're diverting fleets inward, pulling everything home. They think we've got more ships like Holt's waiting." His voice shook with awe. "They don't even trust each other enough to confirm it." Captain Reza exhaled slowly, his jaw set like stone. "That's how empires die. Not in fire, but in disbelief." Corporal Jennings, younger than most at the table, finally spoke. His words came halting, but carried the weight of someone who had seen too much too fast. "All my life they told us the Dominion couldn't be resisted. That surrender was survival. Holt proved that a lie. He showed them fear can change sides." Every eye turned toward him. For a moment the room held nothing but the quiet rasp of recycled air. Reza nodded once. "Write that down. It belongs in every broadcast." And so it did. By the week's end, recordings of the battle and Holt's speech were stitched into a single transmission, carried on relays hidden across the solar system. When the message reached surviving human colonies, it did more than tell a story. It reshaped reality. The Dominion's propaganda, once ironclad, buckled under the weight of undeniable proof. Their invincibility was broken, their lies undone by the sight of their own armadas running. On Earth itself, cities still bore scars, shattered towers, scorched craters where Dominion bombardments had struck. Yet among the rubble, voices rose. Families rebuilt shelters with new resolve. Songs emerged in burned-out Nage, HBR hoods, carrying Holt's name as refrain. Where despair had hollowed people for years, pride now surged like a tide returning after drought. Among the Dominion, the effect was even sharper. Entire sectors pulled fleets home, terrified Holt's hidden armada might strike again. Trade collapsed as convoys scattered without escorts. Governors turned paranoid, accusing their rivals of withholding intelligence. In corridors of high command, officers whispered of rebellion. All of it born from one captain, one ship, refusing surrender. In the weeks that followed, survivors of Vanguard were invited to speak at every outpost still standing. They recounted the story again and again, the way Holt had stood in the command chair, voice steady even as the reactor cracked apart beneath his feet. They described the moment life pods launched, and the way Holt had overridden the system so his seat remained behind. Each telling spread further, translated into languages of colonies long cut off. Humanity, once fractured, began to unite not under orders, but under memory. Months later, Captain Reza stood before the rebuilt chamber in New Geneva, scarred but upright. The gathered council pressed for strategy, for weapons, for fleets. He gave them Holt instead. He didn't hand us a victory, Reza told them, his voice carrying across the hall. He handed us a chance. The Dominion is bleeding because one man reminded them we will never kneel again. It is our task now to carry that forward, not with despair, but with will. Holt is gone, but the idea he gave us is alive, and it is sharper than any weapon. Silence followed, then the chamber erupted, not in empty cheers, but in the heavy roar of a people rediscovering themselves. On the Dominion's side, intelligence confirmed their worst fear. Recruitment faltered, soldiers deserted, lesser species whispered rebellion. In private reports, even their admirals admitted the unthinkable, that a single human vessel had changed the balance of terror. Back on Earth, children carved Holt's name, me into the walls of classrooms. Colonists painted it on the sides of cargo ships. Soldiers wore it on their armor, a reminder of the day 900 alien fleets fled in panic. The Vanguard's wreckage never returned. Its fragments drifted, scattered among Dominion hulks that still floated silent in orbit. Yet to those who survived, the ship had become more than steel or circuitry. It was memory made eternal. And in that memory, humanity found something more enduring than survival. They found belief. Because on the day 900 alien fleets fled in panic, the galaxy learned what it meant to fight humans. Not an empire, not a machine, but people who would rather burn than bow. If this story of sacrifice and survival gave you chills, smash that subscribe button for more unforgettable HFY sagas. Now we want to hear from you. If you were in Captain Holt's place, what message would you broadcast to make 900 alien fleets break and run? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one. Thanks for watching Stellar HFY, where humanity turns the impossible into history. See you in the next story.